What is going on, guys? Today I have a very interesting video for those of you guys who watch my informatics content. I am going to talk about the triple constraint. So I'm very excited to talk about this topic. I am very passionate about this topic, and one of the reasons why I want to talk about it is because I get a lot of questions from you guys who are interested in informatics, wanting to learn more about the informatics and wanting to learn what type of skill sets do you need to know to succeed in the informatics world. And I get a lot of questions about, should I learn coding? Should I learn Excel? Should I learn SQL? Should I learn all these different type of pure technical skills? And I think a lot of emphasis, maybe I haven't really done a good job of it. Granted, the technical stuff is great. There is a whole other side of informatics that's really, really important. And I think in the next couple of videos, I'm going to try and talk about a variety of these things, but today I want to talk about some of the project management principles within informatics. Project management is super key in succeeding in this field, and I think it really needs to be talked about because a lot of it is also involving your soft skills. I don't really know where this topic today will fall under, but let's just get right down to it. So let's talk about the triple constraint. And I'm gonna go through some of the basics. I'm gonna try my best to make this video very brief because I have so much to say about this. I can probably talk about this for days, like I am now, just going off on some random tangent. Anyways, I'm gonna try to get to the basics. What is this? Why is this important? And talk a little bit, just a little bit, I'm gonna try about some of the use cases and how you might leverage this tool. Let's start with the basics. What is the triple constraint? The most basic definition, you can just Google this and find it. It is the three most significant restrictions on any given project. And when I say this, it's not just pharmacy informatics, it's any project out there. You could be a pharmacy student working on a project, pharmacy resident working on a project, a medical student working on a project, a undergrad doing some homework assignment working on a project. Doesn't matter. Any given project, these are the three most significant restraints or restrictions. And the three are scope, schedule, and time. Other names for this is the project management triangle or the iron triangle. I like the triple constraint. It sounds cool. There are many other things you can talk about with just like basic definition. Something I think would be important to highlight is within the triangle, usually quality is in the center of it. So these three things, how well they work together or how well they're defined or how well you achieve the three things, you will get quality in the middle. So why is this important? And basically it comes down to the fact that these three things are all kind of interconnected. You can't really change one of them without really impacting the other two. And the translation here is basically that you can't have it all in a sense. And most examples will kind of talk about the pick two idea, where when you can only have two of them if you constrain one of them. And so let's use an example here. Let's say you have a project that has very tight resources and your costs and resources are constrained. Then what may happen there, because you're tight in one area, you can only pick one other one. So you might end up having a lower quality project or a project that may take a longer amount of time or a project that has less functionality or less features because your scope needs to be decreased. So that's kind of the translation of why this is important. And I think I want to highlight this because, you know, as someone who works in informatics, this kind of triangle, if you will, is what you base a lot of your decisions on and how you want to convey your messages to various stakeholders. For example, you have a project, and typically that's just a simple example. You usually have many projects that you might be balancing at any given time. And you have to have conversations with them because let's say you have 15 projects that you are working on or actively involved in at a given time. And 5 of those projects, their stakeholders want to increase the scope or want to speed up the project. Well, you can't without impacting other things. So let's say they want to speed up these 5 things. Well, it requires more resources. And where is that resources going to come? It's going to come from the time you're spending on other projects. So you have to have conversations in which you can ask them, is this important? What is the reason why we need to do this? Because other projects will be basically deprioritized in that sense. But it's okay. The thing is, why it's important is you, as the person who is part of that project, need to take that into consideration in order to drive those conversations. You can tell them, like, is this okay to deprioritize? Or should this not be prioritized? And the basic idea is that you have to make decisions and think about everything as a whole. And how you convey and talk to your stakeholders needs to have all of this in place. And I'll talk about this a little bit more when we talk about some examples. Let's talk a little bit more concrete here and move on to talking about a little bit more about each one of those 3 things, starting with scope. So what is kind of scope? It's more of the nuts and bolts of the project, if you will. It is the specs or the build specs of that project. So let's use an example. Let's say your organization wants to develop a pharmacokinetics calculator for your pharmacist to monitor drugs that have a narrow therapeutic index and maybe help them calculate what an appropriate loading and maintenance dose may be, and even help them recalculate it as they progress through the day. So as the patient changes, the renal function changes, or kidney function changes, whatever it may be, when those things occur, this will help them make appropriate decisions for pharmacokinetics. So with scope, you have to define clearly what drugs meet this definition, what drugs should be included in the project. Should it be all drugs that have a narrow therapeutic index? Maybe there's a patient issue or patient safety issue, or a joint commission requirement where certain drugs are more prone to error and you want to target those drugs for inclusion in the project. So you need to clearly define all of that to determine your scope. And something else with scope is complexity. Within informatics, it's a field, and I shouldn't just say informatics, it's just in projects in general, there's usually more than one answer to any given problem. And depending on the solution that you choose, so for this pharmacokinetics calculator, you can do it, let's say, 3 different ways. You can have a student on rotations create an Excel sheet for every single drug that has the pharmacist input the different parameters that will drive the loading or maintenance dose of a given drug. Pretty basic. You can probably have a student project do that, and that's not that difficult of a scope. But let's say you want to make it more complex and make it integrated into your EHR. Let's say, for example, your pharmacist has this drug like vancomycin, and you want them to use this calculator. You want to integrate it, so you provide a link every time that drug is ordered to this Excel that the student programmed. That's an increase in scope, but it's probably not super complex because you're just linking to something else that's outside of the EHR. But technically it's within because there's a link there, So that's 2 different ones. But then you can go a level further and say, well, I want it to be integrated into the EHR. I don't want my pharmacist to input anything. I want the EHR to do all of that for me. And so they would look up the patient's weight. They will look up their last serum creatinine. They would calculate the very specific mg per kg dosing for a specific drug based on what's ordered. All of that inside the EHR. That's a whole nother level of complexity. And you might need to involve multiple teams. Well, you probably need to involve multiple teams, but there's a lot of other complexity, complex things that need to be considered when doing these types of things. So that is what I'm talking about with scope. There's different things, and most of the time these questions can't be answered without talking about the other things. How much resources do we have? How much time do we have to implement? So all of these things need to be considered, and I probably spent way too much time talking about this one thing. So let's move on to the next. The next thing is resources. And for this, it's kind of common sense. Actually, this entire conversation and video is probably common sense, but probably people don't think about it all the time. Resources, you know, how much do things cost? How many resources do we need? Do we need one analyst devoted to this project? Do we need two analysts? Do we need multiple analysts? Do we need a dedicated project manager? And then something else that I think a lot of people don't think about is how much time do we need to take away from your stakeholders, your end users, your subject matter experts, or your SMEs? You know, you need to bring in a physician or a pharmacist or a nurse or a administrator. You're taking time away from them when they could be doing other things, and that has a cost associated with it. So that all factors into the cost, and many projects usually is constrained by a budget. So there's only so much leeway you have in this area, so that needs to be considered. Now let's move on to the last one, which is time. And this is pretty self-explanatory as well. It's just basically, when does your project need to be completed by? And many things can drive this decision. You know, you have your basic things of what is required in a hospital accreditation, or something within your policies that requires something to be done by a certain time. Those are pretty simple, you know, just need to have something done. Here's the deadline. This is how much time we have to do this project. But there are other things like maybe a new building is in place. We want to get things built before this project, or I mean, this building is complete. So you have this certain allocated time to complete a project. Or you might have, you know, some emergent thing where a patient was harmed, or some safety issue that just needs to be addressed in a very short period of time because we need to act on this and take care of it. So you have this constrained time. So all of that kind of drives the timelines. Kind of wrapping all of this up, as an informatics pharmacist, or as anyone who practices within the field of informatics, you make these kind of decisions, and these three things should be on your mind on a day-to-day basis, because as you work on these projects, your stakeholders undoubtedly will want to make changes, and undoubtedly in life, things change. You know, whether it's the deadline gets shortened or the deadline gets longer. You don't usually see that. I mean, it depends on the project. Everything's it depends. So then you have like scope. You know, there's new features that come out, there's new functionality, but when you increase scope, you know, it has to come from somewhere else, whether you have to hire more people or you have to take longer to complete a project. Those three things, I can't harp enough, you have to think about those things. So it's really important to have this on your back of your mind, and more importantly, when you talk with your stakeholders, and I keep talking about it, I'm probably repeating myself, but these kind of things in the back of your mind should be driving the types of discussions you have with your stakeholders. And it's not that it's a bad thing, you know, it's just something that helps you develop those contingency plans when either your scope needs to be increased, or you get a shortened length of time, or you have less resources because maybe someone quit, things like that. When you have these kind of things within a project, and of course your project will have those things, then you need to start thinking about, what do I need to do? What do I need to move, or what do I need to impact to make sure my project succeeds? And there are many things you can do when something changes within a project, because there's always something that will change. So let's use a quick example. Let's say, you know, you need to do something extra. Let's say there's a new accreditation requirement that requires you to further add, let's use the same example, pharmacokinetics calculator. Let's say you need to do a better job of monitoring digoxin, and you want to develop a calculator for that. And that's increased scope if it wasn't already included in your project specs in the beginning. So now you have an increase in scope. This is kind of probably small scope. Again, it depends on the complexity of the project, but you do have an increase in scope. So now what are you gonna do? Let's say the timeline can't change because you have to deliver it by this accreditation guideline, and now you have an increased scope. So the only thing you can change are your resources. So how do you change your resources? And there are a variety of ways that you can do this. Obvious answer is you can hire someone. Well, even with that said, there's more complex things to consider there. When you hire someone, doesn't mean you're automatically increasing resources. Well, that person needs to be trained, and you're gonna take away time from individuals that are on the project, which will make them less efficient, to train someone else. So hiring someone isn't always the answer. It could be, if we're thinking about maybe something long-term, you can train them over time, and over time, you're gonna have another resource that can help further that project along. But that's one thing you can do. Another thing you can do is you can have your workers put in some overtime. Now, that usually is a temporary solution, but it's a workable solution. Maybe it's like there's something that just quickly came out of the woodworks and you need something completed by tomorrow. You obviously can't hire someone tomorrow, or maybe you can, but it's very difficult. And you ask your workers if they can put in a little bit more overtime to get this done and accomplished by the very next day. That's something to do. But you obviously have other things to consider, like working and burning people out. So you have to be careful with that as well, because the last thing you want to do is you have your best workers quit on you because you just made them work for like 3 months straight. That's not cool. So something else to consider. And the third thing is something you can do, which is kind of creative in my opinion, is you can shift resources. And this is probably a common strategy that a lot of supervisors and managers do, is where you don't have the resources, you can't hire someone in time, you don't want to burn out your workers, but you can look at different resources, maybe on different teams or within teams. Let's say this team is doing excellent, you talk with them, maybe you can bring them over for a short period of time or permanently and have them help with your project. Or someone has experience in this and you can pull them temporarily to help with that. So kind of shifting resources. You're not hiring anyone, your resource cost remains the same in a sense, and you can still get the project and meet those project deadlines and meet that new project scope. So those are all things you can do, and that's what you should be doing when you're in this field, looking at different things that you can change when things go awry in a given project. And like I said again, things will always change, and project scope, cost, and resources, those kind of things change. And so to succeed in this field, I know I'm repeating myself, you should be thinking about this in your day-to-day decisions. All right, guys, this probably turned out to be way, way longer than I wanted it to be. I wanted to just kind of introduce this concept to you as you progressed through your journey towards being informatics whatever. It could be informatics pharmacist or informatics analyst in general. But I want you to start thinking about these things because it's very important. And maybe in the future, as I talk more about these other topics that you should be aware of or concepts that you should be aware of, I'll circle back around and elaborate more with more concrete examples and more detailed explanations of different things so you guys can learn about that. All right, guys, if you enjoyed this content, definitely give this video a like. And if you have questions or anything, leave a comment below. Subscribe, because I can always use more subscribers. And you guys know the deal. I will see you guys next time. Hey guys, thanks for tuning in and watching the video. If you like the content, definitely hit the ImproRx button over to your left to subscribe, and definitely check out more videos over here to your right. Now, as always, if you have questions, comments, and even better, suggestions for future videos, definitely let me know in the comments below. Otherwise, until next time, guys.